Welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity, where we talk about drinking culture, pop culture, politics, and anything else that comes up. Joining me as always is Brandon.
Hello, my people.
Gail.
Hi.
Jim unfortunately succumbed to over much freedom. So we're going to miss him, but we'll see him back in a couple of weeks. So today we're going to talk about an interesting topic, at least a topic that I find interesting. And Brandon will be back in just a second. And that is freedom. And more specifically, freedom in the United States. What do we think of it? We're going to be doing 2 episodes on this topic. So first, we're going to sort of talk about the nuts and bolts. What is freedom in this country? What do we consider this freedom to be? And then next week, we're going to talk a little bit more philosophical about what is freedom as a concept. But I think we'd better start off with what we're drinking, since we have the freedom to drink whatever we want to drink. So, Kale, why don't you start off? What do you have in that?
Oh, I'm having a very free and American beer called Blue Moon Belgian White.
Traitor to the United States of America.
Because it's better than most American beers, to be honest.
Pretty good.
Oh, there's a lot of good American beers now too. I think with the craft beer movement, I'm not a big beer guy, but I can admit there are good beers, good American beers out there. It's not as
fucking close to water.
I was gonna say it's not as Monty Python always called it, fucking close to water. Brandon, what are you having?
So I had some gin, but I didn't have any tonic. So I poured a glass of gin and added a fruit punch packet to it, and it's pretty good.
When that happens to me, what I do is I substitute the tonic with more gin. So it's then just a gin and gin.
So you don't mix the packet in a little bit of water first?
No, I just poured it straight into the gin and added ice.
Yeah. I can't complain about that. I am having a top secret experimental cocktail, which we will do on the channel at some point. But it's got an interesting spirit-based spirit that people don't use a lot for cocktails. I'm not going to say a lot more about it, but the spirit base is very American, and we will talk about it on an upcoming episode of our cocktail channel. So starting off, the thing that sort of triggered this is we kind of see a lot of people in the media and, a lot of people in the right wing talking about how this is a free country and it's freedom because freedom is freedom and freedom. Well, at the same time, voting to take away abortion rights, to ban books, to, just ban everything they don't like, while at the same time saying that they're for freedom. And I find that to be not a particularly cohesive political philosophy. I don't know. Do you guys have any sort of initial thoughts? Kale, what do you think? Just the idea of people constantly talking about it as this is the freest country that ever freed.
I think that individualism has been pushed so hard that people think that that's the only freedom there is. I'm free to do what I want, regardless of how it affects you. And I don't think that's what freedom really means.
Brandon, what about you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I know many years ago they were doing one of those episodes that you see like on The Daily Show or something like that, where they were interviewing. I think they were interviewing a bunch of Tea Party people, and it sure seemed like their conception was that this was the only place with freedoms. And everything else was just a worldwide gulag with different names on it. They didn't seem to think that other people had like freedoms of press or, freedom to move about or, live their daily lives. They seem to legitimately think that only existed in our country.
Which is interesting to contrast by all of the sort of legitimate measures. If you look at, so these are sort of things that are ancillary to freedom, but I think they're interesting to look at. And then we'll look at sort of the more direct freedom links. So the first is the homicide rate in the United States ranks 137th out of 194 countries. Now, some people might say, well, that doesn't affect freedom. And I would say that being murdered affects your ability to have freedom. If you are murdered, you can exercise. It's much more difficult to exercise your freedom after having been murdered. Now, I have not been murdered, so it's possible I'm wrong on that, but I'm really willing to put money down on murder hurts freedom. And we have a quite high rate of murder, really kind of crazy high compared to most other industrialized nations. We're even below a lot of non-industrialized nations. Kale, go ahead.
You're already tripping over a line, because what's the difference between killing somebody with a gun and killing a baby at a doctor's office?
Well, a lot of things, but that's outside the scope of this discussion. But yes, lots of things. Also, crime rate, and I think this is all crime. I was having a hard time getting to their exact methodology. We are rated 56 out of 137. Also, again, if you're free people, then you probably aren't having your shit stolen, and you're probably not, being attacked in your home, and you're probably not being mugged. Those things affect crime, affects freedom, because
people have what they need.
Right. Well, on top of that, they wouldn't need to. So now we're going to do the real. Actually, before we do that, I want to talk about two other ratings. And these ratings I feel are incredibly flawed, but I'm going to bring them up anyway.
Well, one sec. Related to the crime, don't we have the most amount of prisoners per capita too?
Oh yeah. That's actually. I'll go back to that when you're talking about this next thing, and I'll tell you exactly what the numbers are on that. But yeah, we're crazy high on prisoners. And so I'll get that in a second. But first of all, the two numbers that I think are basically entirely flawed, and that is Heritage Foundation and Cato both have rankings based on freedom. Heritage Foundation is basically right-wing Christian organization, and Cato is Libertarians. So I could just lump those all in as assholes. But even by their rankings, Heritage has the United States ranked at 25, and Cato has us ranked at 15. So even right-wing organizations don't believe that we're free.
What's their metrics? Does it say?
I think it's sort of tough to get into all of it. I believe their metrics largely rate towards economic liberties.
Of course.
Because obviously they would. And Heritage probably with religious liberties, but they're you really have to get, and we're going to get into something sort of parsing that. But yeah, so even these right-wing organizations, even they don't think we're the freest country on earth.
I think our press freedom is actually rated pretty low too.
I'll get to that. In fact, US News, which is, I don't know if they're totally unbiased, but they're decent. So the best ranking we got was specifically based on religious liberty, where we got to be number 6. So if you're saying that the United States is the freest country on earth, and the highest ranking we got was on religion, and it was number 6. I don't know if that's something to super brag about. Now, the one that I think is probably the most important is the Freedomhouse ranking. And so the latest Freedomhouse score gave us number 62. We were number 62 of the freest countries on earth. Now, this has to do largely with being democratic and that type of thing. So we're literally almost halfway down the entire chart. That's not the freest country on earth. Again, if mass numbers of people are unable to vote, then that's not free, because they can't take part in the system. And the other one is the World Press Foundation. And they ranked, and this is specific on press freedom, we ranked number 42 out of, I think, about 180 some countries. 42 is definitely better than 180, but it's not great.
It's interesting, the only about half the country ever actually votes. And I think a lot of people have this possible misconception that the other half just isn't that interested. It's possible, though, given the wait times and the fakey amount of IDs that you need, all this other kind of stuff. It's possible that voting has been shoved into that area we call privilege, where you've got to have at least enough money to be able to, maybe take the day off if you have to, instead of starving to death. And you have to at least have probably a car to get to your only polling station.
It's all going according to plan, Brandon.
I mean, it really seems like if you made it a federal holiday and opened up election, polling places at like every government building, every school, every police station, fire station, just everywhere, or vote electronically or whatever, it really seems like you would up your participation, and nobody seems to want to do that.
Well, a couple of things I want to throw in here, since we're kind of on this at this point. First of all, freedom of the press doesn't go over so well in Saudi Arabia, I heard. Also, as far as the ability to vote, how many states just passed a bunch of laws just this year that made it way harder to vote? Like 30 some?
They do it constantly.
It's probably the same number of states that are trying to enforce the pro-life movement too, and probably the same states that are trying to force the Second Amendment enthusiasts along. It all seems to be coming from one direction. You can argue that both wings are part of the same bird, but all of the discrimination, all the oppression, all the people that are against regulations are regulating the things they don't like. So just say
two things of note here. So in the Fraser Freedom Index, which is basically along the same lines as Cato, it's a libertarian think tank. So there they give the United States number 6, which I think is interesting. But I find interesting some of the countries that were ranked kind of alongside us. You have Singapore, New Zealand, Switzerland, Georgia, Lithuania, Ireland, Australia, Denmark. So you have a bunch of these Western European and Northern European countries that I was always told are socialist and horrible and have no freedom. And yet one of them is ranked higher than us. Again, this is a libertarian think tank ranking countries by freedom. And they are saying that, no, the US is not as free as Switzerland, a country that absolutely had mask mandates, has a high income tax level, and has all these other things.
Well, I know we're going to get into the philosophical part of it later, but I always understood the difference between the parties. Well, I don't know that I would say that. The difference between right wing and left wing understands freedom as the right wing understands it as freedom to, and the left wing understands it as freedom from. We can talk about that later, though.
that's fairly accurate.
So, Brandon, you had asked about incarceration rates, and yeah, we're not so great there either. But I mean, you would think that a free country, a free nation, would not be imprisoning more people than everybody else, but we do that. So, just real quickly, it would not make sense to compare the U.S. Directly to China or India, because obviously the United States has a much smaller population than China or India. But just for the fun of it, if we did compare China and India, both with populations over 1 billion, to the United States, which has a population of 330 million, China and India would have a little bit more people in prison than we do. Very, very close. So the United States has 2.68 million people in prison. 2.06 million people in prison. China and India put together would have about 2.1 million people in prison. The main difference, though, is China and India represent roughly a third of the population of the earth. And they imprison only slightly more people than we do. And we are, a tenth of the population. No, a 20th of the population.
So what's the percentages?
Well, the better way to look at it is top 10 countries highest rate of with highest rates of incarceration. And I believe this is looking at per, let's see here. I'm doing this on the fly. I apologize.
Is it like the homicide rate, like per 100,000?
I believe it is. Yeah, it's per 100,000 people. So if you look at the countries, and so, sometimes it's interesting to look at the room you're in. So when you see your country has a certain ranking, to look at the countries that rank sort of around you. And that's the company you're in. And now I'm not insulting these countries. I'm just saying it's something to think about. So at number 1, you have the United States with 629. So we have almost 50 above the next country. The next country is Rwanda. The next country after that is Turkmenistan, then El Salvador, then Cuba, then Palau, British Virgin Islands, Thailand, Panama, and St. Kitts and Nevis. As you can see, there's not a single developed Western nation on that list anywhere close. And number 10, St. Kitts, is 423. Now, some of these countries where you have the British Virgin Islands and St. Kitts, they're very, very small countries, exceedingly small countries. So for them, a high rate could be some kind of a statistical aberration. But we're not in the company of any other nations that are in our same class economically. So in my mind, if you are imprisoning more people than one, or almost as many people as 1/3 of the rest of the planet, then you can't really call yourself the freest country on earth. So I don't know, Kale, why don't you talk a little bit about incarceration? Tell me what you think about that.
Well, that's perfect timing because I just was thinking about that. I wonder, because I don't have the numbers in front of me. But as far as incarceration goes, obviously there's murderers, there's bank robbers, there's tax fraud, and like white collar crime, stuff like that. But how much of the population of incarcerated people in this country are there for like small time drug charges or unpaid fines or
I think it's like half. I think last number I knew was like 1.8 million nonviolent offenders.
like just little bullshit stuff? And why are they in there? Because the prison system is monetized. It has been privatized and it has turned into a business. It is not about punishment or correction or rehabilitation. It's about making money.
Well, it's kind of about reinstating slavery too. According to the sentencingproject.org, Black Americans are incarcerated in state prisons at nearly 5 times the rate of white Americans.
I was going to quote the same thing, and for another note on that, it's Brandon, you were a little off. It's a little less than half. It says 46% of people are in prison for nonviolent offenses, and yeah, that's not great. I mean, if somebody didn't do it violent, why are we putting them in? And again, also included in that list would be white collar criminals that stole millions or billions of dollars, but obviously those people are definitely in the minority. I mean, most people are talking about drug offenses, like Kale said, unpayment of fines, things like that.
Well, and if we're leading the world in incarceration percentage, that means that most of I don't know. I'm not good at math, but if our highest percentage of people in jail are Black and probably Black males, and we lead the world in the most percentage, it really seems like, because they bring back things like the chain gangs, and you can say, oh well, they get paid like so many cents per work, so it's not slavery.
I want to mention something personal here. I have a friend, and I'm not going to mention his name on here, but he did something wrong and he is in jail now. And I can tell, and yes, he's a Black male, and in his 20s. He's a really nice guy. He is just very calm and polite and just super nice guy. But when I talk to him on the phone, since he's been in there, it's hardened him. He is becoming a different person, and that bothers me.
Well, I mean, it gets into the idea of, and I feel like we're bumping up against another category that we're definitely going to be doing a full episode on, which is, the way the prison system works in this country, which is to say that it doesn't. I mean, the goal of the prison system should be rehabilitation. And by that standard, our prison system is an absolute abject failure. Recidivism rates in this country are terrible. But yeah, so I wanted to go into one other thing on this that I think is important. So when we talk about freedom in this sense, and again, we're going to talk about it in a more ephemeral sense next week, but this is kind of in a nuts and bolts kind of a way. What is freedom in the United States? And I'm going to talk about a couple of areas. So the first one is just personal autonomy, being able to do the things you want to do. And we're sort of also going to, when we get into these in a little bit more detail, as Brandon kind of foreshadowed, we're also going to look at from and to, freedom to do something versus freedom from somebody else doing something. And that's important. Because if you only look at your freedoms, then you're ignoring the fact that, hey, I'm another person and I have freedoms too. And if you cut my head off, then I don't have very much freedom anymore, except to be ahead. But I'm changing. So economic liberties. So this is, the ability to, buy products, to start a business, things like that. And I think that those are important, but I think there are also important froms there too. We should be free from businesses doing certain things to us, whether it's stealing our information or and I might have a personal anecdote about that I just ran into today, actually. So political liberty. So this is being able to vote for the people you want, be able to take part in democracy, be able to protest, be able to have a voice, that type of thing. And bodily security. So again, this is something people don't talk about as much when we talk about freedom, but I'm sorry, if you are being intimidated by people, whether it's through physical violence or other means, then you're not free.
Say like at a polling place.
Right. I mean, if Brandon tries to go out to vote, and I'm standing out in front of his house with a baseball bat, saying, well, maybe you shouldn't. Who knows? Um,
Or if they're standing at the window of your car with a gun and a badge and telling you to give you their money.
right. So you don't have personal security. So you don't have freedom. Your freedom can be taken away very, very easily. And the last being religious freedom, which is another one where the from and to are going to be very important. So on the first one is one where I sort of wrote down the most number of things. And by this, these are the things that you cannot do in this country with regard to personal autonomy. And so these sort of range from what I think are the important and maybe the more trivial, but I think they're all interesting. So prostitution, you cannot pay somebody to have sex with you. That is illegal. If you pay somebody to have sex with you, or if you are paid to have sex with someone, then that is illegal, with the exception of Nevada. Go ahead.
Outside of Vegas.
Well, actually not in Vegas. It's illegal in Vegas too. It's in the state of Nevada. You cannot purchase drugs that the government has decided are bad for you, like marijuana, which kills 800 billion people every minute of every day.
I've seen it with my own eyes.
No wonder there's any humans left.
How could you not?
Public alcohol consumption. This is something that Vanessa and I talk about a lot, where we would like to go to a picnic, go to a park and have a couple glasses of wine or have a drink, but you can't do that. You literally can't drink in most public parks. That seems like something, if you live in a free country, you'd be able to have a drink wherever you wanted to. Let me see here. Public indecency. So you can't be, if you want to walk around in the buff, as they say, then you cannot do that. Again, a lot of these are state laws, but still you don't have the freedom.
I kind of appreciate that one, to be honest.
Well, with regards to some people, possibly, but
even there, I mean, you can't point to a good reason why men can go shirtless and women can't. It's just our puritanical roots.
You cannot drive whatever speed you want to drive. You
Bullshit.
Well, Sammy Hagar certainly has something to say about that. But unfortunately, Sammy Hagar has to drive 55 or somebody will give him a ticket. The next one was sort of something that I mentioned in kind of is a little more ephemeral, but the idea of police state and surveillance, that you don't have the freedom from being surveilled at any given time. Wherever you're going, people can film you. They can watch you. Police can stop you. So you do not have freedom from that.
In the name of safety.
Yeah, safety. Blue laws. There are many places that still have blue laws where you cannot purchase alcohol, and some places you can't even run a store on Sundays. And
a dry county.
Trying to read my handwriting. Oh, you can't mail spirits. So if I want to mail, if Kale was in another state and I wanted to mail him a bottle of whiskey, I couldn't do that. That's illegal. So I don't know. What do you guys think about those? So these are just like some personal autonomy things. Can't
you order beverages online?
Well, they don't ship USPS. They'll usually ship FedEx. So it's not the federal government won't ship them. And you do require a lot of licensing, and there's a lot of ins and outs to it. A lot of places don't ship across state lines. A lot of places only ship in state.
But you can ship a gun across the country.
Well, to throw a bone to the gun nuts, typically when you're shipping a gun, it has to be shipped to a Class A dealer. But you still are shipping it. So
what if you hid booze in the barrel?
It might probably be all right. Yeah, so I don't know, what other personal autonomy things do you think? And again, these could be, because again, some of these, I think there probably should be speed limits. Some of these things probably should be illegal. I'm not an anarchist. I do believe that something should be illegal, but you can't say that we don't have these freedoms and then also say we're a free country.
Well, one of the big ones too is bodily autonomy is under attack right now.
Right. Which is certainly going to be. I didn't put it on the list because it's not currently illegal everywhere, because they haven't officially overturned Roe v. Wade, even though they're clearly going to. But yes, in the future, definitely abortion.
I was gonna save this for the second part where we're more in a philosophical mood, but since this is the only answer I can come up with to that postulation, and that is that freedom is doing what you want without interference of others, up to the point of interfering with the freedom of others.
The way I've always heard it that I liked was my freedom to swing my arms ends at your nose.
But the one problem sort of that comes out of that also is there are collective action problems. Let's say, for example, that I decide I'm going to pour out, 300 barrels of crude oil just onto my property. Well, it's my property. Why can't I? Until you realize that, wait a minute, that's going to get into the drinking supply, and that's going to affect the commons. And you don't, and so this is not my nose, but it's the commons nose, and you can't swing into the commons nose either.
Yeah.
Why would you waste that many gallons of crude oil?
I just love the smell of oil in the morning. Can you guys think of like personal autonomy type things that we have that are illegal in this country? I sort of went through these a little bit. I don't know. Or do you have any comments on the ones that I talked about?
Which one? Okay, run it through again.
So prostitution, drugs, public alcohol consumption. Well, public drunkenness would be the same thing. You can't be outside drunk. I go back to Ron White's. I wasn't drunk in public. I was drunk in a bar. They threw me into public.
I think that it should be okay to consume alcohol in public places as long as you are not inebriated.
But then again, I think I don't mind that. I think that's reasonable. But again,
I think that's a compromise.
You can't sit here and say we're an absolutely free country where you arrest people anytime they're a little bit over the legal limit. Now, I don't think freedom is the end all way to judge whether a society is good or not.
I'm not saying if they're drunk, you should just go arrest them and throw them in jail. You should help
forever.
It's a community thing. And I think it's up to the.
I don't disagree with you, but what I'm saying is I'm trying to adjust the expectations here. I'm saying that there's so many people that say or seem to indicate that the most important measure of whether a society is just or moral is whether or not it's free. And I think that freedom is certainly one metric to judge a society, but not the only metric. I mean, let's say a society was 100% free, and it just so happened they were murdering children right and left. They're like, yeah, but they're free. And it's like, yeah, but that's not great because maybe we shouldn't murder children. Like,
that's unethical.
Well,
and you're invading their civil rights to be alive.
And I think all of those kind of fall under the category of freedom too. And I think they're important, but there's also, under the category of freedom from, like, gay people want to be free from harassment and get married. And people would say back before gay marriage was legalized, they would say, they do have the same freedoms as us. They're free to marry any man or woman, opposite sex. It's like, well, that's not freedom from. That's maybe not even technically freedom to, but you're confusing these two.
Yeah, but before you know it, people are be marrying meteorites.
So what if a male?
By the way, I'd totally marry a meteorite. That'd be great.
A male who was homosexual married a transgender person who saw themselves as a male but was also into males. Would that be gay marriage?
Yeah.
I just think it doesn't matter.
Trans male is
it shouldn't matter. I'm just saying.
And by the way, that does bring up another issue, which, I won't mention the state where this would be sort of the most important issue, but that's polygamy. So why do we have a limit on the number of people you can marry? I mean, I can understand that maybe for tax purposes, because obviously you get certain deductions for being married, that some people could have some kind of a tax scheme where you have 4,000 people that are all married together and do taxes together and find somebody to get a tax benefit out of it.
Only if you're a corporation.
Well, then you get every tax benefit. But so I can see maybe making sure people aren't abusing that just to get some kind of a deduction. But I don't have a problem with, somebody marrying.
If you're going to go to that level, why even worry about the institution of marriage? It's just some piece of paper.
But then also there's another freedom that comes into there if somebody was sort of forced to marry somebody when they were a kid and didn't, have full consent. So I guess my point in all of this stuff is freedom is incredibly complicated, and a service level reading of saying, well, freedom is guns. And it's like, well, that's not very smart.
Well, and it's so easily contradicted. What if you asked, the example man, what if you just what if I wanted to be free from guns?
Well, and also, again, we sort of talked about guns in a previous episode. What about my freedom to own a nuclear weapon? What about my freedom to own poison gas? Like, I have a right to own, sarin
many
gas
as
or something like that. Like, why not? That's free.
I fear for my life. I need Agent Orange.
Right. Now the one other one that I sort of wrote down, I didn't get to originally, but I want to get back to freedom of speech in this country. We have relative freedom of speech, but even freedom of speech has significant levels of restrictions. So hate speech does not have a restriction. So there isn't, you can be hateful. You can say hateful things, and that's perfectly fine. And some of our politicians take advantage of that on a daily basis.
You're a duty head.
But I think it is important to point out the actual exemptions of free speech. So obscenity, which I've always thought is a really interesting one. So obscenity can still be illegal. Now, again, the definition of obscenity is somewhat more difficult to come up with. Fraud, child pornography, harassment, incitement, true threats, and commercial speech, which I thought was a really interesting thing. Like, yeah, you can say whatever you want there.
You mean solicitation?
No, it's commercial speech. I didn't read up on it. It has to do with advertising, I think, primarily. I think what that has to do with is you can't lie about your product. So in other words, you can't just say, it would be freedom of speech to, and by the way, another freedom is I can't just put snake oil in a bottle and say, this will give you, 3-foot rock hard erections that last for 10 hours, because that's lying and that's not covered under free speech.
But it is
yet
covered under the
homeopathic
consumer
medicine somehow gets around it.
Well, they have a lot of little workarounds. So the next one is economic liberty. And this one, I kind of want to get you guys' thoughts on. The only couple I had that I specifically wanted to talk about is sort of the first one being the open conduct of business, being able to conduct business as a consumer or a supplier, or whoever, without having the government intrude. And I don't know, what do you guys think about an open, free economy?
Well, I mean, I am an anarchist at heart, so I don't particularly want a state big enough to interfere with a lot of things. But I also want to be assured that the things that force their way into my home on the television or something is telling me the truth. I don't know. It's a complicated one for sure.
Well, I mean, why shouldn't I have the freedom to catch a bunch of rats, grind them up, and sell that as 100% Angus ground beef? I mean, that's a freedom. Why don't I have the freedom to do that?
You're lying to the consumer.
Right, but that's freedom. It's my freedom to do that.
Right.
So in a
But
free
you have
country,
to
I should be able to
protect-
sell you, dog turds and ground up
It's
rats
unethical.
as, great meat.
Immoral.
Morality doesn't even begin to come into it. We're not talking about morality has no place in any of this. We're talking about freedom. I mean, it's almost its opposite in some ways.
Okay, could you reread the original question again?
No, I was just saying, what do you think about economic liberty? And the other one is the from. And Brandon, I kind of want to go to you for this. I think this is an interesting one for you to talk about. There are a lot of things that corporations do right now. They hoard our data. They surveil us. They lie to us in advertisements all the time. They lock us in contracts that are probably against the law because we don't have the sophistication to read every single terms of service that we run across. So how do you look at economic freedom as a consumer and freedom from other people's business interests?
They also backdoor you with the people you would go seeking redress for issues from.
How so?
Well, like a windshield repairing company kind of getting a backdoor with an insurance company.
I'll get to that in just one second. But the other thing, Cale, that you'll see there is mandatory, what's the word? Brain on not working. So like Chase, for example, and I opted out of this, I sent out a thing for their credit card saying that you have to go to them. If there's some kind of a dispute, that you cannot sue them until you've gone through not moderation. That's not the right word. I'm almost there though. So you have to go to their person and talk to them first, where it's a 2-person moderation. Again, I'm not using the wrong word, and I feel like an idiot. Editing Mike is going to be very upset with me. And so in other words, you literally can't sue Chase. You cannot sue Chase until you've gone through that full process. So they have forced you to do that. Now, a lot of people that were a little savvy, myself included, saw that and was like, no, I opt out of that. And you can opt out of that. But most people probably got that letter, set it aside, didn't think anything about it. And now if Chase rips them off, they're going to go try and find a lawyer, and the lawyer is going to be like, I can't do anything for you. You signed this agreement.
Yeah, and I mean, what it's the Vogon saying, well, we put the plans up and the
Such a good example.
I mean, it's like, what were we ever going to do about that? I have no training as a lawyer. What am I going to do? Look at all the fine print? Even if I took the time to read it, the odds of me understanding it are.
I will just say this: never ever buy a timeshare.
And by the way, I should say, Brennan brings up an issue that I just had today, and I'm sorry to Safe Life if you don't like this, but go fuck yourself. I had a small ding in my windshield, and they came over to fix it. And they did a funny thing. Instead of fixing it, they decided to break it 100 times worse. So now instead of having a tiny ding in my windshield, I have a 16-inch crack going from the top all the way down to the side. This giant L, maybe like 20 inches, just a huge crack. Funny thing is, and they had told me this before, but like an idiot, I didn't listen and signed off on it, that if they crack your window while they're trying to replace it, guess who's not responsible? No, me, I am. They have two thumbs and are doing that. So that was infuriating, and I was very upset. And I made the technician stand out there for a solid hour while I kept telling him I was on the phone with the insurance company, and I don't have a problem with that. So I did call my insurance company. When you call Progressive, who does my insurance, the first thing they do is route you through to SafeLight, because you cannot file a claim. You cannot file a glass claim with Progressive, even though they're your insurance company. You have to go through SafeLight.
And so you tell them, hey, your tech fucked up my car worse than it was. You're going to pay for this goddamn thing.
And they will not. They will not pay for it. It was infuriating. My voice might be a little hoarse because I might have raised my voice a skosh when I was discussing this with them in a very, very reasonable, even tone. But that's it. My insurance company is in bed with the person that broke my car. So there's certainly not going to be, they don't have an adversarial relationship. So talking about freedom from economic tyranny, and that is certainly economic tyranny, where your insurance companies are in bed with the people that are doing the repairs on your car. And especially when you have big companies like SafeLight that are doing this on a mass scale.
And they also have the political pull and legal representation and cash in the bank. That means there's literally nothing you can do about it.
As I told them, they should change their slogan to SafeLight, maybe repair, but probably replace. Cale, do you have any other sort of examples or ways to think about the idea where corporations are using their power to influence your freedom or to take away your freedom?
Well, monopolies should be broken up. Companies who break down and fight against unions.
Why, whatever are you talking about? That certainly doesn't happen anymore.
Companies that leave you wounded in a hospital and then say it's not really their problem.
Or literally bleeding to death on a highway and then just wash their hands of it. That pretty much sucks. But that company is now defunct and gone the way of the dodo. So,
but Cale, you're talking about some really hypothetical sort of a situation that I'm sure we don't have any real connection with. No, Cale has had very specific experience. I think we might have talked about that on another episode. I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure that we talked about it on that.
I mean, the most
I have the scars to prove it.
The most specific example of companies that take away your freedom are quite simply companies that run prisons. We literally have companies that literally take away, their job is to take away your freedom. So once again, I think in that situation, we don't have freedom if there's literally a company that can put you in a cell.
Before you
That's
get
where they would turn around and say, the other side of this would turn around and say, well, that's freedom, man. That's freedom too. Businesses get to do what businesses want to do. And someday I too will be a man on top billionaire with two blondes and a Coke. And I mean, it's this fantasy, this temporarily embarrassed millionaires thing.
Says the guy who lost a leg to diabetes and is living in a shack in rural Alabama. That, yeah, just one more thing breaks and I'll be doing fine. It's like, how about this? What if we guaranteed that you're not going to lose your other leg? You know, what if we guaranteed you health care? But that's a whole other thing.
It would be taking away my freedom, my taxes.
Yeah, specifically to Mike's point from a second ago, contractors and Jim, who is not with us tonight, has had to deal with that directly in this past week. Contractors, because you get misrepresented or misclassified or however you want to say it. So basically, a company hires you out, or they hire out a company that hires you out, and now you're an independent contractor.
I mean, literally professional wrestlers are independent contractors. I mean, these are people that put their bodies on the line every day for that, for those wrestling organizations. And by the way, not every, I'm sure there's some smaller organizations that actually employ their people. So I'm not going to talk about everybody, but I mean, let's face it, there's one name in the industry. And that name just had to step down as CEO. So, but all those people who have back problems, knee problems, neck problems, you know, other kinds of joint problems, brain problems from multiple hits in the head. Yeah, tough shit with all your, yeah, I realize you made me millions and millions of dollars by going to shows 355 days a year, but that was then, and now you're not making me money anymore. So why don't you just go somewhere and die?
And then you'll have,
you know, I think the contractor stuff is such an amazing point that I wish I would have thought of it. Yeah, contractors are absolutely exploited to no end in this country.
Well, I mean, interns,
unpaid internships should be illegal.
Yeah. Well, and then you have businesses that'll be like, yeah, but I mean, you're free to go somewhere else. No, not really, because we don't have universal health care here, which means, like, I'm certainly not free to just leave and go somewhere else, because if I'm the sole provider of healthcare for my family, usually a new business will hold that over your head for like a year. They'll say, well, you're a temp for a year, then you'll get benefits. So that means I would lose all benefits I have now and be in even more of a thin ice situation than I currently am, where, you know, you could just be fired at any moment for no particular reason while the business demands loyalty.
I'm in that
But
same
now, then as soon as that happens, now you're all of a sudden in a situation where you have to behave even more the way they want you to, or you won't even get those benefits to start up.
Yeah, I'm gonna table the rest of the contractor discussion, because I think we could probably do a whole hour just talking about that. I think all of us have worked as contractors at one point or another. I think, haven't we?
I don't think I have.
Didn't you work for Manpower?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've all worked as contractors at one point or another. Yeah, so I want to cover the last two kind of quickly and then kind of summarize a little bit. The other is political liberty. Now, as far as being able to protest, I think the US is not too bad. I think that it's, you know, I mean, my wife would say, yeah, but you got to get a permit everywhere. And there's a lot
unless you're a leftist group.
Well, I'm
not vilified as Antifa and, you know, burning down whole cities.
Well, there's certainly problems, but I think that overall you can have alternate political views, and, you know, you're not going to be thrown in a gulag yet. But so I think on that level, we're pretty good. The thing that I think is the worst is voting rights, because there's so many ways that we could be freer when it comes to voting. I mean, the simplest frickin' solution in the world is just, why don't we vote, either make the voting day a holiday or vote on a Saturday? Like, why do we not vote? I mean, well, really both, have it on a Saturday and make it a holiday.
Or extend it. Make it
or extend it, have it a full week worth of voting. I mean, anything to make, I mean, everybody who is
I still wouldn't get it off because my boss doesn't do holidays.
So that would be another thing in the whole economic freedom where, businesses have the rights to take away your freedom based on, businessy business. Yeah, I mean, there's a million things we could do that would make voting easier, but unfortunately, we live in a country where one party benefits when, it's not like where, if voting goes down, it stays the same, goes up, stays the same. No, the right wing in this country benefits when we have lower voter turnout. And so they've gone all in on cutting down on voters. I mean, there was the one guy, and I'll try and include this clip if I can find it, who literally was caught saying, as the number of voters goes down, our chances of winning goes up.
They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Well, and it's not the same point. It's related. Freedom at work. I mean, how many hours a day do we spend at work, and we can't come in when we want, we can't leave when we want, we have to dress certain ways, we have to, I spent many years at a grocery store. I had to keep my hair a certain length, I had to shave,
But if you're an independent contractor, then you could just say, well, I make my own hours and I can dress how I want and I don't have to shave and all that stuff. Unless the person or company that you're independently contracting for tells you, oh yeah, by the way, you have to adhere to all these rules. You have to wear this uniform and you have to be clean shaven and you have to be.
And you don't get to say who's the boss. You don't get to say who gets fired, who gets hired. I mean, imagine if we had actual freedom at work where we got to vote on all that stuff.
I mean, the thing is, I think that if you maintain sort of the current labor structure, I think there is a role for the contractor, and that is my sewer main broke, or not sewer main, but a pipe broke in my house, and I hire somebody to come in to fix it. So it is something that I'm hiring who has expertise. I'm not going to give them a W-2 and all this other stuff. But also we're going to work out when they come in, and they're going to say, oh, I can come in this day or this date. And then it's sort of a true contractor, somebody that says, I will be there at this time or whenever I can get there. I'll do the work. You'll pay me a one-off fee. And then I'm going to move on to the next job. But nobody who works at a job and even has regular hours should be considered a contractor. Because if I'm a contractor, you can give me a piecemeal rate and say you have to do X number of things based on the contract. But you can't say you have to be here Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. or something like that. That's not a contract, it's an employee.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go through these last two a little bit quickly. So the bodily security, and this one I think is fairly self-explanatory. And this is with regard to violence, threats, harassment, things like that. And hypothetically, these things should be illegal. But again, if you're in ultimate freedom, then why shouldn't I be able to harass people? That's my freedom. But what it shows you is that freedom is really all about perspective. And your freedom.
Roboted out. Could you redo that last sentence?
I'm sorry?
You had a little robot moment. Could you say that last sentence again?
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, freedom is really about perspective. Your freedom and my freedom are different things, and you can't look at them just sort of objectively because they are different. People do intimidate each other. They do harass each other. And in many cases, that should be illegal. So we are going to restrict the harassers' freedoms and the intimidators' feelings and the assaulters' freedoms because that makes society better, and that makes our overall freedom better.
Yep.
Do you have any other thoughts on bodily security? Other than it's good.
I mean,
like my bodily security.
That too seems like a no-brainer, but I mean, then again, you're also then making the group of people most responsible for stealing your bodily autonomy, the government and the police that they hire to do it, even stronger, giving them more resources to do that kind of thing. And, they're going to be corrupted just like they already are. I mean, the FBI started an investigation into local police forces being infiltrated by white supremacy groups back in 2006. So this isn't new, but
To paraphrase something that Brandon told me related to this subject, so I'm going to add in bodily autonomy and bodily security to the beginning part, but the ending part says, I learned about that in preschool. You don't hit, you don't bite, you don't kick, you're just nice and polite to other people. The only reason that people feel like they need a gun or they need something to protect themselves is because they don't trust other people, because we've been taught that it's America and you're free to kick ass. That's the American way, instead of being like, hey, that person looks like they could use help.
I am free to kick ass in Elden Ring, which is a great game. The last one, I want to talk about one more, and this one's kind of, again, this seems super self-explanatory, and yet there's so much disagreement about it in this country, and it's religious freedom. And again, this is to and from. You have the right to practice your religion in whatever way possible, but everybody else also has the freedom from any consequences of your religion. I think to use an example from Islam, for example, you have the right to say that in your religion, it is wrong to draw the Prophet Muhammad, and you're more than welcome to have that thing. But you can't go to somebody who's not a Muslim and attack them for drawing that, because they're not a Muslim. Those rules don't apply to them. And obviously in the United States, Islam is not the primary religion that we have to worry about this on. Christianity, obviously, the idea of banning a million different things, prostitution. It's the idea of exporting the sort of morality that is expressed in your religion and saying that everybody else has to abide by that.
That's an excellent point. I've been chewing on that for like a week, honestly, in my own delvings in my own head. And like,
the lunkings into your brain.
In America, it's typical when you start talking about religion, everybody immediately goes Christian. But that's only one religion. There are so many other religions out there. So that really complicates the idea of freedom of religion, because in America, everybody thinks that religion is you're either a Christian or you're not a Christian. And that's not necessarily the case. And on top of that, like Brandon said, there's the freedom of and the freedom from. And I totally agree with that you have a right to be whatever you want and believe whatever you want and say this about that. But when someone sitting next to you says, "Hey, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm done with this conversation," you can't keep forcing it on them. And I think, and that's something. Well, that's something that I really want to emphasize here. Is I get so tired of hearing American Christians say, I'm being persecuted because I'm not allowed to go out and force my beliefs on other people. No, you're being restrained because you're being an asshole.
Well, and it's another from. I should be free from a theocratic government.
Yeah, it's one of those things I find to be, I mean, again, it's not that complicated. If you want to go to Sunday worship, if you want to go, Wednesday worship, you want to go to the temple, to the mosque, wherever. I mean, you have absolutely more than happy. I think that, that sort of diversity is probably good for the country. But you can't go around and tell people what they can do with their bodies based on your religion. You just can't. What you can do is you can say, well, I disagree with you vehemently on whatever. But then you just got to throw up your hands and be like, well, we're a free society. So, people got to do that. And what's great is there are so many Christians out there that are 150% on board with that would see certain things and be like, you know what, that's not what I do. I don't like it, but it's a free country. Well, or maybe it is. And I need to just kind of let that go because it's not mine. It's not mine to do.
And there's just certain of them, not my wife, of course, but there are certain of them, evangelical types, who see their freedom to believe these things trumps somebody else's freedom to go get an abortion privately, to walk into a clinic on, a very difficult time in their life, without being harassed.
Or to, in fact, murder the doctor who's performing the abortion.
Yeah.
Which happens.
And they only see those protesters, those murderers, those anti-freedom psychopaths only see their freedom and don't care about anybody else's.
It's a lack of empathy and understanding.
Well, I think that we've kind of covered the nuts and bolts U.S. topics. We're going to move on next week and talk a little more philosophically about things, and hopefully less depressingly. I mean, you'd hope, right? Cale, do you have any kind of final thoughts on, the sort of right-wing fetishization? By the way, I'm going to include in here, there's a great article I read talking about the fetishization of freedom in America. And that's sort of what led to me to thinking about this more and more. So do you have any thoughts about the way Americans really have a tendency to just fetishize their freedom, whereas they don't really they don't analyze or sort of break down what that means? They're just like freedom in America.
All right. Well, real quick, before that, we covered the freedom of and from on religion, which was something that I wanted to mention. You asked earlier about certain personal liberties, alcohol in public, stuff like that. I'll come right out with it. Personally, I think marijuana should be legal in this country. I don't think it's terrible. I think that it should be subject to the same regulations as alcohol use and things like that. You shouldn't be out there operating machinery when you're under the influence of that particular substance. But I don't think it does any more harm than any of the products that people use to damage their bodies already that are perfectly legal, like alcohol and tobacco.
And fast food.
And prescription drugs and fast food, yes.
Processed sugar.
To sum it all up, though, at the end, as far as the fetishization of freedom in this country, don't let your fear make you want to control other people's lives. That's the problem. You don't understand it, so you're afraid of it. It's not what you want, so they can't do it. And fuck you for that, because you're an asshole.
I have 2 points. One, that is very well said. And Cale, I do have to say that operating heavy machinery when you're stoned is just awesome. Trust me, it's great. Brandon, do you have any final thoughts?
I would say it's an interesting choice of words. There's another part of fetish as an object of like a physical object that helps in like rituals and things like that. And I think both the Constitution and the American flag are possible fetishes. And my freedoms and all subsequent phrases are the magic chants that go along with it.
Yeah, I guess my only closing thought was, remember, freedom is perspective. Your freedoms have to always be taken into account of other people's freedoms, and remember that sometimes it's very complicated. So just think about that. Think about
everything is more complicated than you think it is.
And you should probably know more than just 2 or 3 amendments.
And yeah, I think we're probably going to do another episode about this at another point, maybe get drilled down into a couple of these more specifically. But for right now, I want to thank everybody for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe, and have a good drink. And have a good day.
You can say what you want about this country, and I love this place. I love the freedoms we used to have.